we welcome this wonderful panel of Iowans who are all, in many ways, vocationally committed to climate action. And so we're going to start with Stacey Walker. He's a Linn County Board of Supervisor. And then Sister Ann Jackson. She's in charge of eco-spirituality at Prairiewoods here in town. Prairiewoods Eco-Spirituality Center. Thank you. And then David Thoreson, who is a world-renowned photographer, adventurer, explorer, and climate environmental activist up from Okoboji. And then Christopher Anderson is a climate scientist, climatologist, agronomist, really passionate about, I've worked with him for really since 2013 when my predecessor, Susan Hendershot, invited us to be on a panel together in Ames, and we've known each other ever since. So that is our panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Stacey to each share a few minutes of their reflections.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all for having me and for this organization for hosting and bringing together so many individuals to talk about an issue that is pressing in one of the greatest challenges of our time. Before I begin, I'd like to just offer a welcome. I have the great honor and privilege of representing Linn County. This is the second largest county in Iowa. So welcome to folks who are traveling to be here outside of Linn County, perhaps even outside of the state. I extend my welcome greetings to you, and I know there are some other elected officials here. State Senator Rob Hogue, State Senator Liz Mathis, and State Representative Art State, I believe, are all in attendance today, and I know that they too want to welcome you here. I want to start by saying when I sort of started my political career, the central issues that I talked quite a bit about all had to do with economic justice, racial justice, finding inequities in the community. And as I listened to the great lecture that was provided by Dr. and Katherine Hayhoe, I remember identifying at several points thinking, well, when I was coming up, I'd hear a little bit here and there about climate change, but for me, I was worried about folks in lower income communities and having them make their ends meet, and I wasn't quite connecting all of the dots. And, I'll have to level with you. It wasn't until a few years ago, if you attend enough events with Rob Hogue, he'll connect the dots for you. And so I had this slow but profound sort of awakening to this climate crisis that confronts us. And I started to think about how my work, as we talk a lot about food insecurity, and we talk about how low-income folks and minorities are going to be disproportionately impacted. And I was glad to hear Dr. Hayhoe say that it's often these communities, the most marginalized communities, that contribute the least to this climate chaos that we face, that are often impacted the most. And it's a global crisis, as we all know. I had somebody say to me, Stacey, pretty soon they're going to be fighting wars over water. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure it's happening already in Africa. And I mentioned a country where there was some conflict recently. And that person said, no, they're not fighting over water. They're just fighting over who has access to one of the largest, lakes there. I said, well, okay, tomato, tomato, right? So we're starting to see this in every policy area, and I have the great benefit of living in a community where we have such wonderful activists who are able to educate me and other folks who are literally producing the science and are helping us understand best practices. And at Linn County, we have Dennis Dumate is here, who's the Director of Conservation. We have made sustainability and addressing the climate challenges before us a priority. Shortly after I was elected to office in 2016, and as everyone here will know, we withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. Linn County was one of the first counties in the state to resolve that we were going to be committed to the precepts of that agreement. We were going to participate in a climate audit, and just now we are in talks at the county of developing a sustainability department to be a local government that takes these issues seriously and goes beyond sort of the things, the low-hanging fruit, right? The LEED certification of our buildings and committing to watershed management and being more thoughtful with how we instruct roads and maintenance and soil conservation departments. We're really, in this county, we want to take a global approach, a comprehensive approach to climate change and how we can be better stewards of the land and the environment. And so with that, and I'll wrap by saying this, I hope to be more educated. This is something that, quite honestly, as I admitted earlier, I didn't run on this issue, and it took me a while to connect the dots so that I can make the case to my peers in government and state government and federal government why this is important and we can be advocates. And any resident of Cedar Rapids will know when we're dealing with our floods that are happening every 2 or 3 years now, we have a great incentive to get this right for our own well-being and for future generations. And the last thing I'll say, I promise I'll turn it over here. I was moved at the talk earlier this morning. What struck me was happening was we were all grappling with ways to talk to people about this issue, and we started talking a lot about being able to have empathy and identify a person's story and their narrative, and I think that is all too important. And that was a big lesson I learned when I came to office. I was really excitable, if you will, about a lot of issues, and I couldn't understand why other folks just didn't get it. Why don't they understand systemic poverty or structural racism or institutional racism, right? Like, why don't they just get it? And I had some sort of on-the-job training to figure out that this education piece, this deep empathy, is going to be impactful. But I do hope one day we can get to a point in this country where we can just have a conversation and use facts and not move the needle. But slow and steady wins the race, I guess. Thank you all.
Thank you, and thank you, Stacey. I'm very grateful to be here today on behalf of the Prairiewoods Ecological Spirituality Center. I'm very grateful to you, Katherine, for your thoughts. They spark a lot of energy within me and certainly within all of us. So I'm very grateful. We were asked to kind of respond to that talk and also simultaneously talk about our own vocation and how faith invites us to climate action. And I was really grateful for that reflection prior to today even. And then today just capitalized on all of that energy as well. And I was, in terms of connecting the dots, like all good English majors, and I was an English major for a reason because I was kind of turning away from the math and science. And I was thinking of how much of your talk really made sense, that something in me needed to find meaning, and poetry did it for me. And so when we were asked about how faith invites us to climate action, like all good English majors, I found the answer in a poem, or the poem found its answer in me. And the last lines of the poem read, it's simple. Go easy, be filled with light, and shine. And my earliest memory of faith actually happened when I was 4 years old, and I distinctly remember standing in our living room by myself, held up by a footstool at 4 years old, watching on our black and white TV Apollo 11 happen. Perhaps I was first awakened to faith in that moment, and I watched, didn't know it then, these white suits. Now I know, Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbing down the ladder and delicately stepping onto the moon. And somehow, as I look back at that moment now, I know that God found God's search in me. The deeper they moved into the mystery of the moon, the closer I could sense in myself at 4 years old the divine presence within and among and beyond. That search for God continued in me. Each night I was fascinated by the man in the moon. And just outside my southeastern bedroom window, I saw him many nights. In fact, his face lit up my entire being if I positioned myself in my bed just right. I knew that energy. I prayed with that energy every night. The quest quickly became communal. I was the fourth of 6 children. The other 2 came along quickly. And my 3 brothers and 2 sisters explored every inch of the species of 30 acres of woodland, tall grass, field, creek, and wetland we called home in the northeastern tip of Illinois. Nature was our earliest sanctuary and our first introduction to sacramental life. Like Mary Oliver in her poem, nature resonated the spirit of God and grace in each of the 6 of us and in my parents. We shared that common home. Her poem reads, "When I am among the trees." When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locusts, equally the beech, the oak, and the pine, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself in which I have the goodness and discernment and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while," and light flows from their branches. And they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into this world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. So much of what you talk about today, Katherine, is finding meaning in climate change. And I'm just reminded of all of the blessings that our Interfaith has offered us to go easy. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how the Buddhists walk lightly on earth, with each step extending peace to earth. And I ask myself, is that my stride every day? Amid what seems the chaotic and stimulation of our world today, technologically, politically, socially, religiously, our urgent call might be to slow down, to stroll, to move more deeply into the mystery of every living thing, and to sense the divine presence within, to be filled with light. We often pray, the light of Christ surrounds you, the love of Christ enfolds you, the power of Christ protects you, the presence of Christ washes over you. As a sister of the presentation, my religious communities celebrates the charism of hospitality. And over the years of our community life, we have grown to understand hospitality of earth, the hospitality of God, to know ourselves as stewards here. Fortunate enough to work with the Franciscan sisters of perpetual adoration at Prairiewoods, that vocation has called me and empowered me daily. Prairiewoods assists people in bringing their light into focus, the light of God within each of them. And when you talk about providing space to find that place within us that is of God, that is of earth, here's a place that just does that. Not unlike many of the places you know in your lives. We're made in the image and likeness of God, and we resonate with that image and likeness. I'm very grateful to have studied about the sea by Pope Francis. And as he approaches climate change mitigation, he sends it and challenges us to approach it through the lens of social justice, to look at an integral ecology that links care for the earth as the only way to meet human needs. To shine. Our communal call. Prairiewoods fosters and is nurtured by the work of Pierre Teilhard Desjardins, a French Jesuit priest, and also the work of Thomas Berry. Our center is founded on that work. Chardin furthered our understanding of the Incarnation, articulating that the story of the Incarnation of Jesus helped us connect heaven and earth. It's not one or the other. And I appreciate your invitation to unitive thinking, to not reside in the dualism, so that our faith is more than about just one man, Jesus, in one moment in time. But the Incarnation actually reveals the light of Christ in each and every one of us, in everything that's created in the universe, or today as we know it in the universe since. Chardin was convinced, as are we, that oneness with the divine is Christianity's perhaps the greatest goal, and is experienced today not only as looking away from earth for the divine, but to look at earth as communion with God through earth. The very heart of earth beats in us. The very light of earth shines through us. We reflect it, we live it, we move and have our being in it. And perhaps the greatest thing we can do is awaken to that. Awaken in me to that. Theologian Thomas Berry, who considered himself a geologian, also talked about the fact that we need to move from a spirituality of alienation from the natural world to a spirituality of intimacy with the natural world. So I invite us today. It's simple. As you have come into this world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those very stirring words. And I'm a sailor from Iowa, so I have a little different story. And all of you know that we have water here in Iowa, but when I travel and speak in a lot of places like California or New York, it's a pretty big laugh line. We have a water crisis in Iowa, as you know, and I happen to be from Okoboji, with arguably some of the best water quality in the state. And before I get to my little story, I just want to follow up with what Dr. Hayhoe said about another Dave, Dr. Dave. because, like Dr. Dave, I lobbied with the CCL. I'm a member of CCL and went to D.C., and I got the dubious honor of lobbying Representative Steve King. So I had to find ways to connect with my representative from District 4 up in the Lakes area. And, you know, we did it over wind energy. And we found some common ground, ended up having a great conversation with the staff and chief of staff and established a connection. So I completely identify with that story for sure about finding that common ground and making that connection. So it's super important. As a professional photographer and someone who's a water quality advocate and a physical explorer of the planet, I identify with the Church of the Outdoors and nature. And that's been confirmed time and time again, the beauty of the planet and photographing the beauty of the outdoors, whether it's in the Iowa Great Lakes area or around the state of Iowa or in the Arctic or Antarctica. So I've had the privilege to travel to and explore very slowly, I might add, because I've traveled around the world at the speed of a riding lawnmower on a sailboat, and I've sailed 70,000 miles around the planet now. And when you're out there on the world's oceans, you have a lot of time to think. You think about the beauty of the planet. You think about your place in the spiritual world. You think about the climate systems and how they work, how the ocean currents transfer heat and cooling around the planet, about our atmosphere and oceans that are in danger and how the whole system works together. And so water has really been the story of my life. And growing up in the lakes area, that's where I learned to sail, and that's where I learned to love the water. That's where I learned to become a water quality advocate. And going back to the basics, that's where I really learned to love nature and water. And so I've been following the water ever since. I was a little boy, and I developed this dream to go sail the world's oceans. But I didn't know how to do that. I mean, how do you become an exploring sailor when you go up to Hiawatha? And so I met a Minnesota hog farmer, and he took me sailing, and the rest is history. And I've been doing it ever since. And these stories and the water have guided my life. Becoming a water quality advocate in the lakes area and understanding how the water quality problems are really connected so much to the Earth's climate systems has been a major factor in my life. And so, thank you. So anyway, photography and water quality and sailing were my tools in my toolbox that took me out into the world. And so 25 years ago, in 1994, I took off with my farmer friend, Roger Swanson, and we first sailed through the Arctic and the Northwest Passage. And it was a different world back then. There was a lot of ice in the polar region, and climate change wasn't really on the top of my mind at the time. I was there to capture beauty. I was there for the adventure. We got stuck in the ice, nearly lost our vessel, and almost lost our lives up there, and finally got out and retreated. I returned 13 years later in 2007 and actually witnessed one of the Earth's great tipping points. And I was there to witness a 40% loss of ice to our Earth's polar ice cap in just the 13 short years since I had been there before. And at the time, I had actually learned from other scientists that this Arctic ice death spiral was going on, and climate change was a big thing in 2007. And I went there to do what's called ground truthing, to actually go out there as a physical explorer and look at the world and document it through photography and film and bring those stories back to tell about. And I was so profoundly affected and changed by that I came back from that 2007 voyage and said that I'm going to work on climate change and climate issues for the rest of my life, and connect these dots and have these conversations with as many people as I can, and that's what I've been trying to do. And it's all of you and everyone in this room that inspire me every single day to do more and to try to do my part. And so we have big stories that we can all tell. I have my big climate story, but you know what? It's the local climate stories, and it's our local connections to nature that most affect me. And just as Dr. Hayhoe was talking, I think Iowa is positioned very well to be a leader in the fight in this with climate solutions. And we have it right out here. We used to be a tall grass prairie system, prairie pothole region. These were some of the greatest natural sequesters of carbon in history, right here, right outside. And so I'm a big advocate to bring some things back from the brink of industrial farming around the edges and start restoring nature and implementing these solutions right here in the state and becoming a leader, cleaning up our water at the same time that we're implementing climate solutions. We should be 100% renewable in the state. I think we should set that as a goal. Heck, wind energy was controversial 30 years ago, wasn't it, in the state? And now we have 40% of our state's energy being supplied by wind. So we should be 100% clean energy state. We should clean up our water, implement solutions, and provide more recreational opportunities for our kids so they'll stay in the state right here and work on these solutions together. So let's go, let's work together. Thank you, Dr. Hayhoe, for inspiring all of us, and thank all of you for inspiring me and the rest of us.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to stand up because during the week I work at a job where I sit all the time. Saturday and Sunday is when I get a chance to stretch out. My name is Chris Anderson. I worked as a climate scientist for quite a few years. And recently what I worked in was more along the lines of analyzing climate trends and rainfall and understanding their impacts to communities in Iowa in particular and the Midwest in general, as well as on farms and in the farming industry. And what really resonated today in what Katherine had to say with me is that first question: what do I tell people to do? And there's a real important reason why that resonated with me. Katherine had the response that the most important thing that she tells people that what they can do is to talk about climate change. And I think I have something that's just about as important that I think everybody should do. I think it's critically important, and you've heard it already this morning, that you know what centers you to be active in climate action. You know what that story is, that every day you can go to and you're like, that inspires me to take climate action. It could be a story, it could be someone in the headlines, it could be your neighbor, it could be anything that they said up here today. It could be that you're an adventurer and climate change impacts your adventuring. It could be that you're a politician and climate change impacts your constituency. So I think that is what I tell people nowadays. That is what I told increasingly even farmers when I talked to them before. What is it? What is the story that engages you in climate action? And I just want to point out, it doesn't have to be as amazing and as astonishing as some of the stories you've heard today. And in my case, it was actually someone who I hardly even know. Someone that was a part of my church that I had a handful of conversations with over the years, and that I really didn't even met climate change to begin with. This person has since passed, and I didn't have enough conversations, of course, with this person while he was alive. But this is how it worked. As I was going through my career and analyzing climate data, weather trends in Iowa, the evidence became obvious, right? Weather, especially rainfall trends in Iowa, are different than they used to be, and at least partial blame is the greenhouse gases that are in the air. So that was a curiosity for me. I went into weather because I like storms. In the early 90s, the first thing I did was work at this National Traditional Laboratory, and that got me hooked on science and storms. And over the years, as science unfolds, you find these questions to answer, and you go after those and discover these questions and new answers. So I found the answers in Iowa about, well, what's going on with the weather change? And my curiosity was basically satisfied. But I suddenly had an ethical problem. The ethical problem is this. Imagine if I'm at my house and I fill up a bucket of water and I walk right next door, dump all that water in my neighbor's basement. I'm kind of in trouble for that. I'm liable for the damage I just caused in my neighbor's basement. So as it became clear that rainfall trends are at least partially attributed to greenhouse gases, we can make the same argument when it floods in Ames, when it floods in Cedar Rapids, when it floods in Iowa City, when it floods in the smallest community in Iowa, I'm at least partially to blame, right? So science can't answer that question of what to do now. So that's why that question really resonated with me. What do I tell people to do? And what I want to tell you is find that story that gives you your inspiration to do climate action. I found it in someone I hardly knew at my church, and it answered the question that my life's goal, my life's profession was not able to answer. And it's also the reason why I can talk to you more today about this. Let me just say a couple things about this person. This person was probably the most zero-waste person I've ever known. And at the time, that really stood out because not so many people in our world are zero-waste people. But, for example, this person owned a car. And rather than drive it, he kept it parked in his garage. He walked everywhere, he biked everywhere. Winter, summer, rainfall, doesn't matter. That's what he did. And here's the reason why he did it. It wasn't because of climate change. It was because he knew if he took $1, spent it at a convenience store to pay for gas, that dollar would go back to large corporations. He has no idea what they're going to do with that dollar. No idea. He wanted to be in control of his investment, in control of his resources. He wanted to know what they were going to accomplish. And that's why he was a zero-waste person. So to me, I was stuck with this question. I'm dumping rainfall in my neighbor's basement and causing harm. What do I do? And his answer was, if you do zero waste, if you go for no waste, you know where every single one of your resources are going, then you will do no harm. You have no liability. And that's how the story came to be inside of me to talk more about climate action. Not just to talk about data, not just to talk about STEM, not talk about even adaptation, but climate action. One other thing about him is he probably never had a job that paid him more than $30,000 a year, but because he was so careful and so dedicated to wanting to use his resources for good, when he died, he left a large gift to our church of over $1 million. And that gift is in a foundation, and it's specifically used for missions, because that's what he put all of his money into, for supporting missions around the world. So a lot of that goes towards missions in our community, as well as missions that are globally oriented. So there you have it. It doesn't have to be sailing through the Arctic. It can be the guy at church that you barely know. But whatever it is, find that climate action story, because today is great. You know, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of excitement. But tomorrow, we all won't be here. We need to be able to find that story.
All right. Well, thank you. And it's enough, right? We have enough time. We're moving along. Everybody stayed on task. I'm going to ask Savannah to come up and get the microphone. And she's going to be down here. If you have a comment, a question, go ahead and come up and take the microphone and ask that. If you need her to bring the microphone to you, you can do that. Just go ahead and come forward and line up. The idea is that we've been on time, so this is a cue to keep your comments kind of brief and keep moving along. And if you're queued up, then you know there are other people. But if you do need us to bring you the microphone, raise your hand and we can bring it to you. So.
Okay. Can you hear me now? There we go. All right. I'm Craig Mosier, and from Iowa City. I'm delighted to see all the young people working on this issue. This is just incredible. I am so sorry that my generation has messed up and left you with this problem, but we're going to help do whatever we can to help you get going on it. So my question has to do with the role of churches, because churches are remarkable institutions. Think about for vehicles for social change. Think about the commitment of people in churches, the value systems that are shared, the committees people are used to working together on and accomplishing stuff, the facilities that are available, the paid staff, the self-funding. Remarkable vehicles for social change. My question is, how do you see the role of churches in furthering this agenda in climate change?
We are the church. We are the church, people of God. And I was thinking, here we sit at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, who has done incredible work in terms of climate change already, just by, in a variety of ways, but also by hosting this. And I think that the role of the faith community plays an incredible part, an incredible importance. I was thinking after the flood, when we hosted interfaith meetings of people from various churches across faith traditions, and it seemed to just melt the boundary lines from church to church, from denomination to denomination, from faith to faith. There was a way that together we walked our talk about care for and with earth and care for and with one another. So I think churches, as we all know, they play an incredible part. So thank you.
I just want to add quickly, I grew up in the Black Church, in the Southern Baptist tradition. And part of the culture of the Black Church is organizing. And in the 1950s and 60s, faith communities really stood together for social action and stood up for civil rights. And many experts will attribute the ritual community organizing that happened in fellowship halls and basements of churches and synagogues that really helped inspire movement. So I think, I'm very much a layperson, but if I were to say sort of a divine edict of churches is to make this community, make our world better, right? So we've got to figure out a way to inspire collective action among faith groups, and events like this is super helpful. I was recently at a conference at Howard University where the topic of discussion was reparations and what are the church's roles in advancing that conversation. And some churches are better than others with this issue. But what I learned there is that it really takes sort of this wholesale commitment of the church. And I was talking to a bishop there, and he's an African-American guy, and he's like, he's a bishop, I think he was from Baltimore, and he said 99% of my church is white. And so he said, can you imagine me putting the question of reparations to this Episcopal church, I believe it was, and trying to make the case. But as we have heard time and time again, it was, we have to start the conversation, right? And churches have to decide, and they can't go kicking and screaming. They have to decide. The congregations have to decide that this issue, whether it's reparations, whether it's social justice, or in our case, how are we going to address the climate crisis before us? They have to decide. It takes strong leadership, and it takes congregants who are willing to venture out into the abyss of the unknown in a lot of respects and find their conviction. So I hope everyone will take this conversation back to their church and really do a gut check to figure out where they're at.
Hi, my name is Katherine Stein. I'm Iowa Field Consultant for a national organization called Moms Clean Air Force. Thank you, Dr. Hayhoe, for noticing my t-shirt. I was busy trying to formulate questions on my phone I couldn't acknowledge. I have to tell you a little bit about the double life that I lead living in Iowa, because I'm not a U.S. citizen. I don't vote in this country. I'm here on a green card. I've lived here for 35 years. I'm Latin American. This means that I do the things that people do in Iowa on a daily basis while I carry something else along with me on a daily basis. I have not heard from any, oh, by the way, before first I empathize. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Every one of you has said things that have struck a yes with every chord in me, with every word you have said. And I also want to thank Matt and Senator Hope. Here is the question, and something I haven't heard from you. In this context of how does climate change relate to us, please remember the people who lead double lives in Iowa. Iowa has a lot of immigrants, and we are growing. One of my tasks through Moms Clean Air Force, and please talk to me about how I can be a resource for you, is to reach out to Latinos through a program called Okoboji. Si hay alguien aquí que tenga comunidad latina, por favor, háblenme. How do I reach? What is your experience reaching? And I'm not talking about Latinos who are barely surviving every day. I'm talking about professionals. I'm talking about career Latinos who have that double life. They are here every day in Iowa, adapting, working, playing the role, but at home they're still dealing with grandma, aunt, uncle, cousin, and the world is one. So what happens in Iowa to me as a Latina is important to my brother and sister in Costa Rica, to my cousins in Colombia, and I would like to have that addressed. Please tell me, how do I communicate to fellow Iowans that helping people connect to what happens 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 miles away from here is just as important as what happens to us here every day in our house, in our community. If you have anything to say about that, thank you.
And we'll keep that to kind of a brief response because we have more people lined up, but please jump in. I can address it unless, go ahead.
I think I can't speak generally for all of Iowa, but where we have that connection in the church that I'm in, it's United Methodist Church. We have the committee on committee on response, I think, for, I can't remember the name of our own committees. That's all right. I'm not a committee guy. So the main point is they respond to disasters. It's a disaster response committee. And places in the world that have the least capacity to respond to disasters are those communities that we address the most frequently. And we are finding ourselves that our resources don't fit the size of the task anymore. So that's where the stories come back to us about how what we do as a congregation and as a group of believers and faith people has an impact on them, and what they are experiencing has an impact on us.
And I would say briefly, we're in this incredible transformation. This has never happened in human history. And the transformation is very challenging, and some people are pulling back in the challenge. But we know that the only path forward to success is to embrace the challenge collectively. And so what we're doing in Iowa cannot be disconnected from what's happening 2,000 or 3,000 miles away. And so there's very much a tension of folks who want to react to this crisis in an internal clinging and creating others. And that's not going to be successful. And our churches call us to do just the opposite, and that is to embrace how we all are in this together, not just our neighbors in our state, but our neighbors globally.
First of all, I would like to say Assalamu alaikum, meaning peace be upon all of you. I am a Muslim. I am an imam. I run the Mother Mosque of America here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, first mosque in North America. I want to say that we as Abrahamic faith, including Christian and Jew, but we came from the other side of Abraham, Ishmael, and his mother Hagar. We are Quranically or divinely connected to environment, to the earth, and we are a very positive energy to bring peace and harmony to the earth and to the environment. I want to tell you personally, I felt so many shocked and as I said, overwhelming happiness when I heard our speaker talking about the environment in her scientific and logical way of addressing. It makes sense, and I am asking to include a Muslim on your panel discussion, and also to all audience, I am encouraging to have interfaith dialogues and interreligious council in your area. If you are from Linn County, we already have one. But if you are outside Linn County, please bring interreligious council or interfaith dialogue into your neighborhood so we can live in peace and harmony. No more it is isolated or we are in the box, we are out of the box. And this is our land, and this is our environment, and this is our country. I have children, I am looking for my grandchildren to live in peace and harmony in this country. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you for being here, everybody. My name is Miriam Kashi. I live near Iowa City, and this question is for you on the panel and also for Dr. Hayhoe, if you're still available. I first heard you speak when a small group of hardy pilgrims walked across America 5 years ago. You spoke to us. I don't remember where it was, but you were impressive then and again today. Thank you. So my question has to do with the role of direct action in this struggle we're in to save our planet. You know, we look in history, we see the suffragettes, we see the civil rights movement, we see the LGBTQ struggle, we see all these things that have been accomplished in large part because people took to the streets and committed acts of civil disobedience. And I'm a party to that myself, so I'm invested in this question and what you think about that having to do with our climate crisis. Thank you.
I'm a big fan of direct action. Go figure, no surprise. As a student of history, there are, if you look at these large, big social movements, right? You named a few, and I've talked about a few. Here are a few elements you typically find, right? So, mass action. And then you have in the direct actions that people can take. We can all point to these different moments throughout history that have become famous that interrupt systems. That's the whole point of direct action, and it should be nonviolent, right? And you can interrupt systems. But along with that, what people often forget is, I think we like to think of, we can point to the march in Selma, we can point to the march in Washington, we can point to freedom riders and all of these things, right, that stand out in our minds. But in addition to that, it takes time, dialogue, and you have to appeal to the moral consciousness of the nation, or in this case, the world. And so there's education that happens. And it typically takes, there was research on this, between 10 and 15 years, closer to 15 years, to change the zeitgeist, if you will, or the sort of social understanding of the time. And I'll just very quickly point out a couple instances to add some color to this. You think of people here remember when you could smoke in public places, right? Some people remember that. But do you remember when is it the Smoke-Free Iowa Air Act, Iowa Smoke-Free Air Act, when there was discussions about that, this state was up in arms. Right? People were screaming bloody murder, this was a violation of our liberties, and how dare you, and it's going to be a snowball effect, and what more can't we do after that? And now we're to a point where if I were to light a cigarette in a restaurant, you guys would look at me like I was crazy, right? The Reduce, Reuse, Recycle campaign of the 90s, I think it was. If you see someone litter now, you would look at them like they were a savage cannibal, and you'd wonder what they were doing, right? So these social movements, while it takes collective action, and it takes these instances of direct action to interrupt people's sort of comfortability, but it also takes this time where we are educating. So I'm a big believer in it. I'm a big believer in nonviolent protest, civil disobedience, and actions. But we also have to understand, as has been iterated here several times today, that it has to be supplemented with dialogue and education and that deep empathy piece to bring the moral moment today.
And let me add, I think since we're in a church area here, that the Sermon on the Mount is probably as much of an interrupting event in Jesus' time as anything we're talking about today. So as a Christian, if you're following that example of how Jesus lived his life, he made existing interruptions with that sermon. So direct action, peaceful direct action is definitely something that we've been taught as we read the Bible. And some people ask, well, when have I done enough? Or what do I do is too small? Let me just remind you, though, that every little step you take today, if it is not taken, might require a leap tomorrow. There's an exponential or a multiplicative growth. If you don't take a small step today, you have to take a bigger step tomorrow. So any direct action, if you feel it's too small, it really isn't.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Hickwalker. I'm from Des Moines. I really think systemic change is really very, very important. But I think at our federal, at our state level, things have kind of paralyzed. Back when the Paris Climate Summit met in 2015, a group of us from several environmental organizations in Des Moines got together. With the Interfaith Green Coalition and Citizens Climate Lobby and others, and we decided at the grassroots, local level, we were going to go to the City Council of Des Moines and ask that we now have a Citizens Advisory Task Force that would be advisory to the City Council on climate change, climate action immediately. And so we did, right after the Paris Agreement. It was a long process, and it just shows you how grassroots is so important. And finally, we've been meeting for 4.5 years with the City Council, and we've been just nudging very slowly. And we were just told, we meet every 2 weeks, we were just told by a representative from the City Manager's Office of Des Moines that they're going to finally hire a sustainability coordinator for Des Moines. We've never had one, and that they're going to go into a climate action plan, which we've been asking for almost 5 years is going to happen. So I just want to encourage people to act at the local level if we feel that the federal and state is going too slowly. That was just a comment, and I appreciate your comments.
My name is Jonathan Honstadt, and I work for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So I come at this from a different side, the consequence, the end result of. And so part of my job with the agency is to work with faith-based groups and voluntary organizations that come in and deal with it. And My question, I guess it's just my question, just because I work with so many different groups. But especially this year and the last 2 years, we're seeing a mass migration of people from the coast inland. So the Midwest is going to be a big recipient of people from Texas and Carolinas and Georgia. Last year's storm, a hurricane went 200 miles inland, so not just the coast, but significant pieces of land inward. And so churches have become, and what I'm seeing is this is the Methodists and the Catholic charities is what we're seeing is that churches are picking up a lot of the, we call it slack, that the government doesn't do because the government's resources are being stretched so thin. So whether it's relocating people, whether it's, food supplementation and different things like that. But my question is that as more people move and as more people think, what are communities, and this kind of goes to the politics issue, what are communities, say in the Midwest specifically, because that's I'm a graduate student at UD as well, so what is the Midwest states going to do to start, as people move into new states, you're going to have a strain on resources from the local populations and different things like that. And so my question is how does this migration of people, because we're going to see it, and it's not just from within the United States, but outside as well. So what are we going to do as communities to sort of, meet this need, I guess?
As a resident politician on the panel, I will do my very best. And before I launch into the answer, I'll say quickly, Dr. Hayhoe again mentioned that the vast majority of correspondence that we receive comes from people when they're angry, and I can attest to that. That is very true. You build thick skin quickly. So here in Linn County, a number of local government representatives and other experts from the University of Iowa, the Flood Center, we work a lot with FEMA. We have embarked on continuous conversations about our community resiliency and how, and I think these conversations really emerged after the flood of 2008, and they have continued. And so there is a coalition of thought leaders that are trying to anticipate and prepare for the eventuality of mass migration into the community, but also prepare for how we respond when we have crisis here in our own communities, namely, how do we respond to flooding? And we try to think of everything from, we talk a lot about redundancies. So do we have the ability to get power into areas that have lost power? Do we have the ability, multimodal transportation systems to move people and resources in and out? And we think about if we are cut off from access of food, how much food do we have in the community and things of that nature. So these are all unfortunate conversations that local government officials are starting to have. But I would also say part of the work of this community needs to be some sort of cultural understanding, cultural competency, because as we get folks from other parts of this country, from other parts of this world, there may be needs that are unique to those individuals who are coming into this community, and there may need to be work that we need to do. I think we often like to believe ourselves to be accepting, and particularly folks in the faith community. But I always say America is most segregated on Sundays when folks go to church. So there's probably a lot of work we could do on ourselves and to look inwardly to figure out how we could be good neighbors when this stuff starts to happen.
I think that's a good response. And I want to point more towards individually, some things that you can do as well. All of these decisions in local government are parts of committees, local planning and zoning committee. You can get in commissions and you can get involved in all of those. You can at least listen to their meetings to find out if anybody even utters the word climate change while they're looking at their master plan or while they're doing their planning and zoning. It may not be super fun to watch 2-hour meetings, really. It may not be. But it is one way you can get engaged. The other way is to be sure on a more national level that the people who are elected to our government will want to incorporate climate change into whatever aid they provide the community for example, flood mitigation. Make sure that the flood mitigation plans that qualify are using climate trends going forward and take into account climate change as opposed to ignoring that part of the cost equation. So that's kind of a technical answer in the political world because you have to really dig down deep to know people who know those kinds of things. But it's relevant now with the difference between the last administration and this administration and how the cost of disasters is being calculated without climate change in mind.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to say briefly that this brings up a really good time for this point, and that's that we need to protect the concept of sanctuary, right? As people begin moving from places and get dispersed, especially in coastal areas, they're going to start moving more inland, right? And we need to protect the rights of these people by providing sanctuary. Churches and the faith communities have been at the forefront of this. People are coming to cities for sure, but I think this presents some opportunities for rural areas to also become areas that we could look at some growth in smaller communities that right now are in big trouble. So I think that we have a long history in Iowa of being very gracious hosts to people, and we need to make sure that we protect that concept.
And it looks like we have two more people. If you could make two quick questions or two quick comments, that's all we'll have time for.
I have a comment and then a question. My comment is, my name is Sherry Albrecht. I'm from Walford, Iowa. My comment is to say thank you for the opening meditation that was mindful of the people here whose creator and whose church is nature. I appreciate that, and I know that others here who appreciate that inclusion. My question is, and you alluded to it in the last comment, I'm asking if, aside from all the individual things we can do to combat climate change, changes we can make, people we can talk to, is something even more important is how we vote, and to vote for candidates and for leaders who also embrace the importance of climate change and the necessity of moving ahead to combat climate change. And maybe even more importantly, we have to end Citizens United, which is giving voice to those huge corporations that are based in petroleum, which the speaker mentioned are the biggest contributors to the problem, and we need to end that so we don't have that is just going to exacerbate the problem. We have to get beyond that. And is voting the bigger thing or
Right.
individual action?
We're just going to reflect on that. We're going to let the other person ask their question and then move into the closing. Thank you.
I think I have more of a comment than a question, so we might be ending on a good note there. This is my third time getting to see her speak, because fortunately I'm in the area and happen to be going to all of these things anyway. I would say, no, I'm not a stalker, but that sounds like something a stalker would say. So at one of the other events, the question and answer event that I went to that was at Luther College, on Thursday, I was telling about a story that had happened in Western Pennsylvania. And so somebody very fair, very respectful, Very good question asked, why did they let that happen? And so I answered to the heart of the question because it was an excellent question. It was something that needed to be asked and needed to be talked about. The secondary response I had that I didn't get to say was, why did you, collectively speaking, let pipelines railroad western Iowa farmers and ruin acres and acres and acres of black gold Iowa farmland? So what I'm speaking to here is the concept of this private property and eminent domain, or as I have come to think of it, as government-backed theft of private property for the benefit of these extremely profitable corporations that were referenced as causing 70% of the carbon that we have in the atmosphere now.
And thank you for that. We are going to have, I'm not closing you because it's not important, but we are running up against time, so thank you for that. And could you bring Dr. Hayhoe the microphone? I think she's going to have a comment, and I'm going to bring Reverend Rice up. We do have until about 12:30, so as you're leaving, if you want to talk with folks in the gathering area before we start tearing down tables, please feel free to do that. There's a number of organizations that have come and brought wonderful work to share with you. And I'll just say thank you again to the panel. Thank you to everyone who's here. And welcome Reverend Rice back up to close our day. Oh, I'm sorry. Katherine Hayhoe is going to have a couple more things to say. Then
Sure. So thank you so much. This was a great discussion, and I think having this format was really incredible. Everybody, as you can see, brings their own perspective to this. And so when we think about moving forward, I don't want you to get stuck on the idea of, what's an individual action, what's a system-wide change. The answer is we need everything. So we need to take personal action in our own lives. We need to have conversations with people about personal actions they can take. We need to be advocates and have those conversations. And so attending those really boring meetings is actually a really important thing to do. And having conversations with people about what our city can do, what our organization can do. Voting is a way of having a conversation because you're using your voice to tell people what you want or what you don't want, right? And so action at every level can make a difference. So just be encouraged by that and don't try to parse out too much over should I do this or that or this. The answer is yes to everything. Everything except hitting people over the head with a large heavy book. And so I want to answer the one question that you all asked and upvoted that didn't get answered because I think it's so important, that is how to talk to kids. What we don't want to do with kids, even more importantly than anyone else, and again, this applies to everybody, everybody's a human, but you do not want to leave a kid with a sense of this fear and anxiety, that there's nothing we can do, there's a huge problem, and nothing I can do to fix it. So when we talk to kids, again, the most important thing to do is to talk about what we can do. And I was so challenged by this question, because I've gotten it quite a few times, that we decided to make a Global Weirding episode specifically about kids. Because I thought, well, what are kids doing? I didn't have any examples to share, so we started to look at examples, and we found dozens of examples. And this was before the first Friday strikes, too. There were amazing examples of what kids are doing, to the point where I think, honestly, kids are doing even more amazing things than adults at this time. So when we talk to kids, it's so important to talk about what they can actually do to make a difference. And we are taking our Global Weirding episodes and we're turning them into PBS learning units. So they have discussion questions and activities that kids can do informally in the home or formally in the classroom. There's lots of resources out there for kids. And having those conversations with kids is so important because they are the future. They are the voters. They are the people who have been running everything in very short order. And they already care. They just don't know what they can do to help fix it. So those are some of the most important conversations I think that we can have. Thank you.